Gerard, and Mr. G.
Good evening. Rescue workers continue to comb through the smoldering ashes of the huge gas explosion in Edison, New Jersey.
Officials are calling it a miracle that only one fatality has been reported so far, and the nearly 100 injuries apparently are not serious. Residents of more than 30 apartments remain unaccounted for, but police say that could be okay since so far no missing persons reports have been filed either. 8 apartment buildings were leveled in a fiery explosion that some witnesses described as looking like a nuclear blast.
My first thought was an airplane had crashed in the middle of the complex. The building was shaking. There was light outside. It was like it was broad daylight.
Flames shot as high as 300 feet into the sky after a ruptured gas pipeline exploded. It came in the dead of night, jolting residents of an apartment complex out of their sleep and sending them running for their lives.
Here's a quick look at how things stand right now. Miraculously, only one person is known dead in the blast, a 32-year-old woman who suffered a heart attack. 100 other people were treated at area hospitals, most for minor burns and smoke inhalation. And 40 to 50 residents are still unaccounted for. Julian Phillips is standing by live right now at the scene of the Inferno. Julian?
Well, Katie, it has been nearly 24 hours since the explosion rocked the Durham Woods complex here in Edison Township. It has added at least 2,000 people to the ranks of the homeless, although only temporarily. And although the earlier fear of hundreds of people dying in this carnage has passed, there are still those unaccounted for, and it has officials down here very, very worried. The explosion sent plumes of fire soaring into the night sky, by some estimates as high as 400 feet. The orange fireball so bright, this amateur video captured the scene 25 miles away in Brooklyn. Aircraft flying 11,000 feet above what looked like a giant Roman candle reported smoke rising above that height. More importantly, hundreds of firefighters and rescuers from as far away as Essex County were in a race against death at Ground Zero, the Durham Woods Apartments in Edison Township, home to at least 2,000 people.
At first, the lights went out, and then saw the sky light up. I thought it was like the end of the world, something you see in the movies.
Never seen that much fire in the 13 years I've been involved with the fire service. It was just 8 buildings going, flames 300 feet in the air by that dirt mound up back there. It was amazing, totally, I've never seen anything like it.
By daybreak, the devastation was realized. The blast from the 36-inch natural gas pipe running parallel to the complex left a huge crater at least 50 feet deep, 100 feet wide. 8 three-story apartment buildings completely demolished, the scene looking more like the aftermath of a nuclear explosion.
They needed to close valves on either side of the explosion itself. Once that happened, then the gas was just allowed to burn itself out.
You're looking at what 2,000 plus degrees of heat can do, vaporizing entire buildings and making the rear end of this late model car virtually unrecognizable. Several hours after this blast was contained, smoke is still coming from vans and cars which virtually were melted by the heat of this blast. The blast was so hot, firefighters could not get within 3,000 feet of it. And the ground that I'm standing on was so hot, it took several more hours before specially trained dogs could come in and search for bodies. Officials estimate residents had from 0 to 10 minutes to evacuate. But the big factor in saving lives just may have been this 40-foot dirt berm which divides the complex from an asphalt plant, where the gas pipe was buried 7 feet under.
If it wasn't here, it would have came straight outward, and it would have caused a lot further distance with the flame and devastation of the blast of the gases, which could have ignited the other departments that weren't damaged at this time.
For hours, 300 residents were unaccounted for, and with only 1 fatality and over 30 injured, the rest may be safe. Governor Christie Whitman, who cut short a vacation in Florida, seemed cautiously optimistic.
There appears to have been no casualties as a direct result of the explosion itself. 1 fatality from a heart attack during evacuation.
We are now down to 35 dwellings for which we cannot verify individuals. That is, we have not spoken to a member of the family that resides in those dwellings. Obviously, that could be anywhere from 1 person to 2 or 3.
These were the buildings shot on amateur videotape before the explosion. Now this. Some buildings still standing with exteriors seared from the heat. The complex completely evacuated. Power and gas cut off completely. Yellow markers identifying existing gas lines. And with the search for bodies continuing round the clock and shelter provided for those who need it, the task and promise by the owners of the pipeline and state to rebuild what was destroyed. Well, officials are still calling this nothing short of a miracle that no further lives have possibly been lost. But tonight at this hour, teams of dogs and rescuers are sifting through the rubble searching for bodies. And the National Guard is also on the scene trying to secure this area. But the big question tonight is, how in the world could all of this possibly have happened? Well, our own Ed Miller is standing by live with those details. Ed.
Julian, there are people living near gas transmission lines all over the country, including those who live along several miles of pipeline here in Edison. And of course, they want to know, are they safe? We can tell you that pipeline owner Texas Eastern has been blamed for several other gas explosions back in the 80s. Two, because they failed to detect corrosion along the pipeline. Here, they may have failed to detect a very glaring signal. While federal, state, and local investigators swarm about the skeletal remains from this huge natural gas explosion, we can piece together what some are calling a blueprint for disaster. This past Tuesday, Edison firefighters and the Public Service Electric and Gas Company both investigated complaints from renters about smelling gas. Residents like Marie Clary believe it was a red flag warning which could have prevented this from happening.
More than a fair warning.
That something was amiss.
Something was wrong, yeah. Somewhere. Somebody should have been out there checking.
The high-pressure natural gas pipeline looks similar to this above-ground picture, but is buried 7 feet below the earth. It is 36 inches in diameter and is part of a network which runs from the Gulf Coast to New England. It was installed in 1961. The section which ruptured was physically inspected in 1986 by its owners, Texas Eastern Transmission, and by the federal government in 1987 and 92. Texas Eastern claims to monitor pressure along the pipeline 24 hours a day. If that's true, any sort of crack, even from the bitter cold winter, should have been detected.
You don't usually get something that all of a sudden explodes. You get a small fissure and it expands and then blows.
Be looking at all factors that affected the structural integrity of this pipeline. They could include chemical, metallurgical, initial construction, and the support issue, including such things that might be related to weather.
Emergency management sources tell me they believe this is somehow linked to the weather. There have been several other natural gas explosions, much smaller explosions here in New Jersey the past couple of weeks, one in Clifton and one in Plainfield, for example, which were caused by this winter's extreme cold and rapid frost, which shifted the ground and cracked the pipe. The NTSB and other investigators will be giving that issue special attention. I'm Ed Miller, live in Edison. Back to you, Jack.
Ed, thanks very much. The people in those apartments awoke to a nightmare and had to run for their lives. Many of the survivors of the Edison Inferno lost all they had, except the most precious possession, life itself. Rosemary Gomez talked to some of the shaken residents. Each had a harrowing tale of survival.
A steady stream of survivors poured into a temporary Red Cross shelter, some thanking God, others just trying to keep the faith.
Here. We haven't found them yet either. Yes.
It's been horrible. Horrible. There's still so many people we haven't been able to locate.
For survivors, it seemed like the end of the world, a ball of fire that turned their night into a living hell.
It was as if you opened an oven door and kind of stuck your head in front of it.
My first thought was an airplane had crashed in the middle of the complex. The building was shaking. There was light outside. It was like it was broad daylight.
Their stories are one more incredible than another, but there's one common thread. They all found the strength to survive.
I didn't sleep all night. I walked with bare foot to my touch. I cannot, please.
Some people fled by foot. Others were lucky enough to still have their cars. But by the time they arrived at this Red Cross Center here at Edison High School, they had little else left but the shirts on their backs.
This is all I wear. This is it.
Alan Yan had to carry his father out of the Inferno. Edward Yan is now confined to a wheelchair because he lost everything, including an artificial leg.
That's in the house too, I don't know.
Mildred Warshawski was still wearing a bathrobe and slippers, trying to cope with the fallout.
We jumped off our patio and we're here and there's nothing to go back to.
It was just as stressful for relatives trying to find loved ones.
It's just terrible. I just want to see her.
Some survivors were too young to realize what happened.
She said to it. Still has on her jammies.
9-month-old Taria Wright was cradled from the flames in the arms of her parents, who say they're just lucky to all be alive. In Edison, I'm Rosemary Gomez, the Channel 11 News at 10.
And many of those who escaped the Inferno owe their lives to heroes they don't even know. Dozens of brave residents going door to door inside the complex to wake their sleeping neighbors to the danger.
Started knocking on doors, trying to wake other people up, try to make sure everybody got out.
We were knocking on doors and banging, get out, there's a fire, and my neighbor was like, what's going on? And we're like, there's a fire, get everybody out.
Some survivors say their first order of business will be to find those people who saved their lives and to thank them personally. Jack?
There's other news tonight as we continue. President Clinton faces the music over Whitewater, grilled by the White House press corps in a prime-time news conference.
And it's party time for Joey Buttafuoco. We'll take you to